Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a really dark, but I think necessary exploration. We're looking into one of the most, well, chilling and meticulously documented cases in modern British crime. The life and crimes of Dennis Andrew Nilsen.
Often called the Muswell Hill murderer.
Exactly. And what we're doing here is pulling together a huge amount of source material.
Yeah.
Police interviews, trial transcripts, psychological reports, to really get a handle on the full timeline of what he did.
And the disturbing specifics of his rituals, the whole legal argument about his mental state later on, it's complex.
Our mission really is to just lay out the facts. What happened between 1978 and 1983? We know he killed at least 12 young men and boys in North London during that time.
Yeah, and ultimately convicted for 6 murders, 2 attempted murders, got a whole life tariff. But what's really striking, and what makes this deep dive, I think, quite unique, is digging into the how and maybe even the why.
You mean his specific methods?
Exactly. Luring these vulnerable guys the way he killed them, usually strangulation, sometimes followed by drowning, then this prolonged ritual with the bodies, keeping them, interacting with them.
And then the disposal, the fires, and famously the drains. It's gruesome stuff.
It is. And what hits you straight away, looking at all this material, is the massive gap, isn't it? Between his public face, this ordinary, quiet civil servant,
Diligent even.
and the absolute horror he was creating privately in his own home. 2 homes, actually.
Yeah, it wasn't like a sudden explosion of violence. This was sustained, ritualistic.
Yeah.
Seems deeply embedded in his psychology somehow.
Absolutely. So yeah, we've got a lot of dark ground to cover. Best start right at the beginning, I suppose, with his early life. To really get a grip on the later pathology, you kind of have to go back. Nilsen was born in Fraserburgh, Scotland, November 1945. Parents divorced pretty early in 1948.
He described his childhood as generally contented, though, didn't he, despite the divorce?
He did, but it was massively shaped by one person in particular, his maternal grandfather, Andrew White. Nilsen always called him his great hero and protector. He was the emotional rock, it seems.
Until that rock was just gone.
And violently ripped away, yeah. That grandfather's death, it's the moment almost every analysis points back to as absolutely pivotal.
Right. What happened exactly?
So October 1951, Nilsen's only 6 years old. His grandfather dies suddenly, a heart attack while he was out at sea. Nilsen was taken to see the body, laid out in an open coffin at home.
Oh, wow. At 6 years old.
Yeah. And the sources say his mother, probably trying to soften the blow, told him his grandfather was just sleeping and had gone to a better place.
Trying to protect him, maybe?
Maybe. But Nilsen later said that image, the silent, passive body of the man he idolized, linked with this idea of peaceful, permanent sleep, that became his most vivid, most formative memory.
So it cemented this link in his mind between death, passivity, tranquility even, a really warped connection.
Absolutely. Stillness became associated with peace, but also with loss. And the impact wasn't straightforward. Why did it lead to such a withdrawal?
Good question. It wasn't just sadness, was it?
No, because that idea of sleeping and tranquility was kind of immediately contradicted by all the grief and chaos around him after the death. He became much quieter after that, withdrawn. He started pulling away from physical affection.
Developed envy for his older brother, Olav Jr., didn't he?
Yeah, saw him as more successful. The only real connection he kept was with his younger sister, Sylvia. It's like his inner world just started becoming way more important than anything outside.
And there was another incident around that time, wasn't there? Something that reinforced this theme of death and peace.
The near-drowning experience, yeah. Around 1954 or 55 at Inveralky Beach, he nearly drowned. And he recalled this initial panic just giving way to this powerful sense of peace, of calm, right before he was rescued.
Wow. So that combined with the image of his grandfather.
It just seemed to double down on this idea that ultimate relief, maybe even control, was found in this passive sort of non-living state.
Okay, let's jump forward. He leaves home, joins the Army Catering Corps in '61. He's only 16. And surprisingly, he actually said this was the happiest time of my life.
Yeah, the structure was key for him, wasn't it? The routine, the hierarchy, the external validation things he seemed to really crave. But at the same time, this period is when his inner life, particularly his sexuality, really started shifting.
He kept his homosexuality completely hidden.
Absolutely.
Well,
terrified of being found out.
Yeah.
Avoided communal showers, bathed alone, masturbated alone, which meant his entire sexual development happened purely in fantasy.
And the sources are clear. These fantasies started off relatively, well, not criminal, but they changed fast.
Initially, yeah, they were about a passive, slender young male partner. Pretty straightforward. But that need for control and that link back to the sleeping body, the tranquil body, it just took over.
So the fantasy partner needed to be unconscious or even...
We're dead. Yeah,
Yeah.
that became the requirement. And the real turning point, in terms of visually realizing these fantasies, was during his posting in Aden, Yemen, around 1967. Having his own room there was absolutely critical.
Because it gave him the privacy for what he called visual splitting. What exactly was that?
It wasn't just in his head.
Yeah.
It was a physical setup. He used a mirror, a freestanding one, positioned just so he could see his own body during masturbation, but keep his head out of the reflection.
Right. Why?
It allowed him to split his perception. He could see himself performing the act, being the dominant active partner, while simultaneously imagining the passive controlled partner in the reflection, which was, of course, his own body.
So he was both controller and controlled object. That duality was essential for him.
Absolutely essential. He needed to embody both roles in his fantasy.
And he drew on some really specific dark imagery, too, didn't he?
He did. The Raft of the Medusa, that 19th century painting, specifically the image of an old man holding the limp, dead body of a young man.
Not just inspiration, then.
No, it was like a blueprint. His deepest fantasy became being this dirty, gray-haired old man performing a cleansing ritual on a beautiful, young, recently killed soldier. It brought together the necrophilia, the possession, the cleansing idea from his grandfather's body. It was all there. It was the template for the rituals he'd later act out for real.
Okay, so he leaves the island in 72 after 11 years. Corporal, that loss of structure seems to hit him hard.
It really did. Straight back home, gets into a massive row with his family defending gay rights, ends up totally estranged from his older brother. So cut off from the army, cut off from family, he heads to London.
Tries the police first, right? Metropolitan Police, April 73. Doesn't last long.
Less than a year. He apparently realized his personal lifestyle, those fantasies, were completely at odds with his job. Couldn't reconcile being a copper with wanting to dominate and kill.
But his next job, that provided the perfect cover. Civil servant.
Exactly. From May 74 right up until his arrest in 83, he worked at job centers, specifically finding work for unskilled laborers. Colleagues saw him as conscientious, quiet, a bit of a loner.
And that's the really chilling link we need to remember, isn't it? The guy whose job it was to help and find structure for vulnerable, often rootless men.
Was the same guy who would prey on exactly that population.
That compartmentalization. Maintaining that pseudo-normal face while the inner life was just this storm of violent fantasy, that's the absolute core of this case, isn't it? So the actual killing years, they're really split between two addresses in North London, aren't they? And his methods kind of evolved. Let's start with the first place, 195 Melrose Avenue. He lived there from 75 to 81. The killing started late 78.
Right. He initially shared the flat with a partner, David Gallatin, but that relationship broke down. By late 78, Nilsen was living alone, drinking heavily.
Very isolated.
Which seemed to be the trigger.
It amplified the need to make the fantasy real. And it culminated on December 30th, 1978, the first murder, 14-year-old Stephen Holmes.
He lured him back. Promises of drink, shelter, standard method. But the reason he gave for the killing itself, it goes right back to that need for possession, doesn't it? That passive body idea. Absolutely. Woke up the next morning, Holmes was sleeping beside him. And Nilsen's thought wasn't relief, it was terror. Terror that Holmes would wake up and leave him.
He actually said he was afraid to wake him in case he left me.
Yeah. He decided Holmes had to stay with me over the new year, whether he wanted to or not. So he strangled him with a necktie, then, just to be sure, drowned him in a bucket of water.
Making the victim stay. He literally turned him into what he called a new kind of flatmate. This wasn't just about the kill, it was about keeping them permanently.
It was the start of the core ritual. The killing was just the necessary step to get the permanent passive possession he craved. Then came the ritual itself. It was extensive.
Bathing body.
Bathing, sometimes shaving torso hair to fit his ideal partner image. Dressing the corpse, usually just socks and underpants, applying makeup to cover bruises from the strangulation.
And then he'd keep the body. For how long?
Weeks, sometimes months. It became a prop, as he put it, in his ongoing fantasies. He'd talk to the corpse, masturbate near it, perform non-penetrative sex acts.
But he saw the bodies as too perfect and beautiful for the pathetic ritual of commonplace sex. That's a direct quote, isn't it?
It is. Reinforces that this was about psychological ownership, that control, not just physical release, but, the practical reality of keeping a dead body in a flat.
Must have become a nightmare pretty quickly.
A complete horror show. He hid the victims under the floorboards. Decomposition was immediate. Obviously, it got much worse in the summer. The smell. It must have been unbelievable. He was using tons of deodorant, insecticide, just trying to mask it.
And the sources mention infestations.
Massive infestations, pupa, maggots. He was living right alongside this decay. The contrast is staggering, this outwardly clean, quiet man living above this hidden crypt teeming with maggots, the fantasy versus the foul reality.
It's just unthinkable. Eventually, he had to deal with the sheer volume of bodies, didn't he? Leading to the bonfires.
Yeah. The decay was too much, and there were too many victims by then, at least 8 more after Holmes at Melrose Avenue. Disposal became essential. He carried out 3 separate mass burnings in the communal garden out back.
And he dismembered them first, before burning.
Yes, all except Stephen Holmes. And to cover the smell of burning flesh, which you'd think would be impossible to hide, he put an old car tire on top of the bonfire.
Trying to swamp one awful smell with another, basically. Burning rubber and plastic to cover that.
Yeah.
Hoping neighbors wouldn't notice these huge, frequent tire-topped fires.
The risks he was taking were immense. The dismemberment, the burning. Then afterwards, he mentioned finding bones, smashing an intact skull with a rake. You can feel the desperation, the sheer labor involved in maintaining this secret life. By the time he left Melrose Avenue in October '81, he'd killed maybe 9 men there.
And he only left because the landlord wanted the flat back for renovations, paid him £1,000 to leave, not because he was caught, which led him to 23 Cranley Gardens. And that move changed everything.
That move was his undoing, really. Cranley Gardens was an attic flat in Muswell Hill. No garden access. Crucially, no floorboards to hide anything under.
So retention and burning were out. He had to switch methods.
Which meant shifting disposal from fire to the drains, the domestic plumbing.
A horrific change in logistics. How did that even work?
It involved intense, grim labor. Dissecting the remains into small enough pieces, trying to flush flesh, organs, smaller bones down the toilet. It took ages, and it needed preparation, which is where the boiling came in.
Using his kitchen stove.
Yeah. He'd boil the heads, hands, and feet, the bits with the most bone, hardest to dispose of in a big cooking pot. The idea was to get rid of the flesh, evaporate the internal liquids, blood, marrow, reduce it all down to smaller, less identifiable bone fragments that he hoped he could flush or maybe just scatter somewhere.
Doing this in a small attic flat, the intimacy of it, the sheer effort, it's chilling.
It really is. And he killed several more men there. John Howlett, known as John the Guardsman.
His murder was different, wasn't it? Howlett fought back.
Ferociously, according to Nilsen. March '82. Howlett apparently tried to use the ligature on Nilsen himself during the struggle. Nilsen barely managed to overpower him with an upholstery strap before drowning him in the bath. He even had Howlett's finger marks bruised onto his own neck for over a week. Shows how close he came to losing control there.
Then Grant Allen later that year.
September '82. Strangled him while Allen was eating an omelet Nilsen had just cooked for him, just mid-meal.
And then the final victim, Stephen Sinclair.
January 26, 1983. Sinclair was 20, a heroin user, had recently tried to kill himself. Nilsen noticed the crepe bandages on his wrists from that attempt.
And he used them.
In this final, awful gesture of twisted sentimentality or control. After killing and dismembering Sinclair, Nilsen used those same bandages to tie up the plastic bags containing the remains. He stored them in the wardrobe, a tea chest, under the bath.
Using the symbol of Sinclair's own despair to seal his fate. Just grotesque. And it was trying to get rid of Sinclair's remains that finally brought it all crashing down.
It's still kind of amazing, isn't it? A case with at least 12 murders spanning 5 years, 2 addresses, ends because of blocked drains. Not some brilliant police deduction, but basic plumbing failure.
So take us to that moment, when the fancy world literally backed up into reality.
Well, ironically, it started with Nilsen trying to fix it himself. February 4th, 1983, he actually writes a letter to the landlords complaining about the drains at Cranley Gardens constantly blocking up.
He complained about the drains he himself was blocking.
Incredible nerve, isn't it? Anyway, 4 days later, a dino rod guy, Michael Catran, comes out. He manages to clear the blockage near the inspection cover outside and pulls out this stuff, a fleshy substance, small bones. He knew straight away it looked human.
And Nilsen's reaction when Catran confronted him.
That's the famous line. Catran showed him the stuff, asked what it was. Nilsen, cool as anything, just says, "It looks to me like someone has been flushing down their Kentucky Fried Chicken."
Kentucky Fried Chicken. Unbelievable, but that bluff didn't last long.
No, barely 24 hours. The police were called, obviously. Detective Chief Inspector Peter J. and 2 other officers went to the flat the next day. And the smell. Apparently, the smell of decomposition just hit them the second the door opened. overpowering.
Jay must have known immediately.
Pretty much. He went straight in, asked Nilsen directly, "Where's the rest of the body?" And Nilsen just calmly pointed to the wardrobe. Bags containing Sinclair's remains were right there.
And the confession came almost immediately.
On the drive to the police station, Jay asked him a simple question. Were the remains from one person or two? Nilsen just stared out the window and said, clear as day, 15 or 16 since 1978.
Just like that, 15 or 16, which is, well, unusually forthcoming. Doesn't really cover it, does it?
Not even close. He was incredibly cooperative. Gave over 30 hours of detailed interviews, 16 separate sessions. He basically handed them the entire case.
Laid out the whole ritual.
Yeah.
The bathing, shaving, makeup.
Meticulously. But he kept making this distinction, didn't he? He insisted he worshipped the art in the act of death, the stillness, the possession, but claimed he got no pleasure from the actual killing.
Said it was about temporary escape from reality, achieving some kind of ecstasy.
Yeah, through having this passive body, he said, I wish I could stop, but I couldn't. I had no other thrill or happiness. A desperate kind of justification.
But all this cooperation, this detailed confession, it actually became the core of the trial defense, didn't it, at the Old Bailey in October '83?
Exactly. Because no one disputed that he killed them. The whole legal fight was about his state of mind at the time of the killings. Was he sane enough to form the intent for murder?
So prosecution says sane premeditated murder. Defense says diminished responsibility manslaughter. Based on what?
Based on arguing he had a severe personality disorder. The defense psychiatrist came up with this diagnosis. Borderline false self is a pseudonormal narcissistic personality disorder.
Okay, can you break that down for us? What does that actually mean in this context?
Well, the defense argued Nilsen lived with this deep internal split. The false self was the quiet civil servant, the mask he showed the world. But underneath was the true self, the narcissist, prone to these episodic breakdowns, usually triggered by loneliness and alcohol.
And during these breakdowns?
The fantasy self took over completely. The defense argued that in that state, even though he knew intellectually what he was doing was wrong, he couldn't appreciate its criminal nature. He couldn't control it. It wasn't rational intent. It was psychological compulsion.
So impulsive acts driven by this disorder, not calculated malice.
That was the argument. They framed it as this desperate need for companionship and control. But the prosecution psychiatrist, Dr. Paul Bowden, he completely rejected that.
Bowden argued Nilsen was just manipulative and rational. What was the prosecution's evidence for that?
Bowden said Nilsen was perfectly capable of forming relationships, making decisions. The prosecution pointed to everything Nilsen did to hide the crimes, the bonfires, the boiling, the drain flushing, even the Kentucky Fried Chicken line.
Actions that showed awareness of wrongdoing.
Exactly. They argued these weren't the actions of someone out of control. They showed a rational mind that knew perfectly well his actions were criminal and needed covering up. He wasn't suffering a disorder of the mind in the legal sense. He was just morally abnormal, but fully capable of intent.
And the survivor's testimony must have been devastating for the defense.
Hugely damaging. Paul Nobbs and especially Carl Stoddard. Stoddar's story was incredible. He described being strangled, drowned by Nilsen in May '82, but then somehow he wasn't quite dead.
And Nilsen realized.
Yeah, apparently Nilsen saw his dog, Bleep, licking Stoddar's face, realized he was still alive. And in that instant, he switched. From killer to rescuer.
He revived
him. Revived him, put blankets on him, and then immediately concocted this elaborate lie, told Stoddard he must have accidentally strangled himself on his sleeping bag zip during a nightmare.
Wow. That ability to switch instantly from murder to rescue to calculated deception.
It completely undercut the out-of-control argument. It showed the jury he could control himself, he could think rationally, he could manipulate when it suited him.
So the jury didn't buy diminished responsibility.
No. After deliberating, November 3rd, 1983, they found him guilty. 6 counts of murder, 2 of attempted murder, life sentence, later made a whole life tariff in '94, meant he'd never get out.
Despite that whole psychiatric defense, Nilsen didn't appeal, did he?
No, he didn't. And later on, in his writings, he kind of admitted the Crown was right, that he did have the capacity to control his actions. But he reframed what the thrill was.
Not just the killing?
No, he said he got an enormous thrill from the whole process. The social seduction, getting the person back to his flat, the decision to kill, keeping the body, the disposal. He was fascinated by the entire cycle of control.
And in prison, he spent time in Wormwood Scrubs, Wakefield, Full Sutton. He kept busy, didn't he? Intellectually active.
Very much so. Did a lot of work translating books into Braille. He painted, composed music on a keyboard he had, wrote constantly letters, diaries, that massive autobiography. Maintained lots of pen pal correspondences.
Still needing that connection, that validation, maybe, even if it was controlled through letters.
Seems likely. He also gained a reputation for being difficult, always filing complaints. Vexatious litigation, they called it.
The most famous one was about magazines, wasn't it?
Yeah, in 2001. He took the prison service to court over them, censoring pictures in gay softcore porn magazines he subscribed to, like Vulcan and Him. Claimed it violated his human rights.
The irony is pretty staggering, isn't it? Arguing over censored images when,
Oh,
well.
quite. The case was thrown out, obviously,
Yeah.
but it just shows that constant need to assert control, assert his intellect, even over tiny things.
But the big project in prison was his autobiography.
Huge project. Started as 400 pages, apparently grew to over 6,000 pages of notes, and the title he gave it, The History of a Drowning Boy.
Right back to that childhood near drowning and his grandfather's death, that idea of tranquil surrender.
Exactly. And the core argument in all that writing, he basically stuck to the defense line, but kind of owned it. He talked about living two lives. The real life, which for him was the fantasy world of murder and possession, and the fantasy life, which was the normal-seeming civil servant job.
Claimed he'd snap instantly between the two.
Yeah, often using alcohol and music, classical or rock operas like The Who's Tommy, to get into this state of ecstasy, joy, and tears, as he put it. He framed the murders as seizing moments to overcome his own inadequacy by possessing someone passive. It was his final attempt to shape his own story, control the narrative.
So how did it end for him? And what about the victims we still don't know?
Nilsen died May 12, 2018. He was 72. He'd been taken from Full Sutton Prison to York Hospital with severe stomach pains. Turns out he had a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm. Died after surgery due to complications, pulmonary embolism, internal bleeding.
Was there a big funeral?
Hardly anyone. Very quiet cremation in June 2018. Just 5 mourners, apparently 3 of them were prison officers. The Ministry of Justice paid for it, about £3,300.
And the unidentified victims. That remains the great tragedy here, doesn't it?
It's the most heartbreaking legacy. He confessed to 12, maybe 15 killings. But the police could only ever formally identify 8 men.
Because of the disposal methods. And who the victims were.
Both. The burning, the flushing. It destroyed so much evidence. And the victims themselves were often so vulnerable, homeless, runaways, rent boys, young men on the margins whose disappearances might not have been reported immediately or investigated with urgency back then.
Stephen Holmes, his first victim, wasn't even formally identified until 2006.
Exactly. It took decades. It just highlights how many families might still not know what happened to their missing sons or brothers. That part of the story remains terribly unresolved. So if we pull all this together, what does this deep dive really show us? I think it's a stark lesson in the danger of the facade, the camouflage. Nilsen managed to keep up this front of pseudo-normality, the quiet, steady civil servant helping others find work while leading this incredibly detailed, horrific secret life built around necrophilia, ritual, possession.
Right inside his own home, 2 ordinary North London flats.
And the whole terrifying chain of events, from quietly keeping Stephen Holmes's body under the floorboards to desperately trying to flush Stephen Sinclair down the drain.
Yeah.
It all unraveled, not because his planning failed, but because of Victorian plumbing.
Because a dino rod man found something that looked like Kentucky Fried Chicken. It really is a grim reminder, isn't it? That routine, structure, a quiet life, sometimes that's the perfect cover for the most monstrous inner worlds. Worlds built on trauma, twisted fantasy, and meticulous, terrifying planning.
Hi.
Okay, as we finish up, we want to leave you with something to think about, a connection that maybe ties the social and the psychological strands of this case together. We talked about Nilsen's job as civil servant helping unskilled laborers find work. And his victims were often exactly those kinds of people, rootless, unemployed, grifting young men, the very population he was interacting with professionally, offering structure by day and then utter domination, possession and death by night.
It's a disturbing thought.
It is. So consider this. How might his day job, which gave him knowledge of and even access to these vulnerable, easily missed individuals, have intersected with his victim selection? Did it enable it? Did it feed into it somehow? That chilling link between his mundane routine of offering help and his profound murderous need for absolute control. That's definitely something worth pondering long after this deep dive ends.